A major new military offensive launched in Yemen could make a humanitarian crisis there much worse. Now, after 3 years of a devastating civil war, the country is on the brink of starvation. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel has this story.
What may be the world's worst and least known humanitarian crisis is on the verge of becoming a catastrophe. At least 2,000 fighters backed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are advancing on the ground and from the sea and air on the port city of Hodeidah. This is day 2 of a long-planned and potentially decisive battle to drive out rebels holding the port. Hodeidah is one of the only remaining lifelines for the country after 3 years of civil war. An estimated 8 million people are at risk of starving, and 70% of humanitarian supplies come in through this now nearly impassable war zone.
8 million people, even before this morning, were already at risk of starvation. If the port is closed, even for a day, this means that these people will die.
Food and water are in chronic short supply. More than 1 million people have been struck by cholera, one of the world's worst outbreaks. The United States has some responsibility for all this. While the Pentagon says it is not involved in the offensive, the U.S. has quietly backed Saudi and Emirati forces battling to drive out the rebels, supplying intelligence and arms. The Pentagon has called for maximum efforts to avoid civilian casualties and for all sides to engage in negotiations. Richard Engel, NBC News.
Well, the UN Security Council is calling for the port to remain open to avert a humanitarian disaster. And for more on this, I'm joined by Yolanda Jacquemet, a Middle East spokeswoman for the International Committee of the Red Cross. Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, you have been in touch with teams on the ground there in Hodeidah. What do you know about the situation?
We're extremely concerned about the situation, both because, as you said previously, Hodeidah is the real lifeline for millions of Yemenis. It is the main port in the country through which most food supplies and fuel supplies enter. And this is a country of 29 million people where 3 out of each 4 citizens depend on humanitarian aid. So these are staggering numbers. But beyond this wider picture, of course, the fate of Hodeidah itself is at stake. We speak of about 600,000 people in the city. A study that we at the International Committee of the Red Cross have published exactly 1 year ago shows that wars in cities make up to 5 times more victims than wars elsewhere. Cities are extremely vulnerable organisms, and we call on those fighting to remember their duty to spare civilians and to spare civilian infrastructure, such as hospitals and water systems. This is critical.
Yeah, Yolanda, just to highlight what you said about this being a key port, I think about 80% of imports are coming through this port. What is the alternative if this port is not open?
There is unfortunately no alternative. It is the largest port in Yemen, and despite a very demanding inspection system that is in place, which has made that ships have been trekking through the port through the past 2 years, it is still the main entry point for the highlands where the 2/3 of the Yemeni population live. So there is simply no alternative, and the closure of this port would mean potential death for those who are on the brink of famine.
Yeah, indeed, no alternative, and you have hundreds of thousands of people at risk here. So how much worse could things get? What are you watching out for now that we should be careful of?
It is very difficult to imagine that the situation could be worse. We've been saying for over 1 year now that this is the largest humanitarian catastrophe in the world, that Yemenis are on their knees, and they are. This conflict is in its 4th year. Half of the people have no access to health care. Civil servants have lost income for now 2 years, and the civil servant in Yemen used to feed a large extended family. Millions of children are malnourished. Millions are out of school. It's a whole generation whose future is at risk. So it seems difficult to imagine how this could get worse. And yet, if Hodeidah were to close imports, indeed, this country that has been drip-fed, it would mean as if, you have a sick person that's being drip-fed and you all of a sudden cut the drip.
All right, thank you for that, Yolanda Jacquemet. Thank you very much.